We'll just again focus on the questions. So it's mainly a Q&A session. We've asked you to send questions in advance. Some of you did. Thank you so much for that. For those who submitted their questions already. It's not too late. If you still have questions, just type in the chat box and we will also address those later. Okay, so let's get started. Let me share my screen. So as I say, this is totally a Q&A session. I just prepared my presentation based on the questions that you submitted in advance. So main sources of information that we will use today, of course, we will use the risk assessment form. Take note, we are now using the version 2. We've already had a webinar before talking about the difference between the old and the new forms. And we say there are not much difference when it comes to the content. It's more about how you present the answer. We will also look at the IG2 guidance version 3. These documents are available in the NEBOSH website. And I think for our students, Trainovate students, this should have been sent to you already. I just want to answer the questions that you sent, looking at the answer from the guidance itself, so that you will all see most of your answers, most of your questions rather, will be answered if you take time to read the guidance. So we will also look at that document. Okay. So what we will also do is we will look at the section or the part of the risk assessment one by one, and I try to combine your questions per part. So we will cover all the questions about part 1 first, and then secondly, the questions about part 2, and so on. Okay, again, if you have additional questions, just type in the chat box and we will look at those at the end of the presentation. Okay, so part 1, quick reminder, risk assessment is divided in 4 parts. Part 1 is a background. This is where you this is like an introduction. This is where you give a little bit of information about the company that you are working for, the area that you selected for the risk assessment, and also the methodology, how you did the risk assessment. So here you need to mention the name of the organization, site location. You can change the name if you think there could be an issue with regards to confidentiality. Site location, no need to put the complete address, but just state where is it located, where in the world. Number of workers, then you describe the organization, and then you describe the area to be assessed, and any other relevant information you can think of. And then the next section is about the methodology, how you did the risk assessment. In this section, you need to mention the source of information that you consulted. Who did you talk to? How did you identify the hazard? What has already been done? And the controls, how did you identify the controls? So the first question that we had is it okay to exceed beyond the given word count? If yes, how many more words are allowed? So if we go back to that part 1, so you can see it says here you should aim to complete this section in 150 to 200 words. And same thing on the next section, it's 100 to 200 words. You will also see something similar in part 1, part 2, every part of the risk assessment. But the question is, are we allowed to exceed the word count? If yes, how many more words are allowed? So this is what the IG2 guidance says about this word count. So I just did a copy paste. So it says this word count should be used as a guide only and should not be seen as an absolute minimum or maximum. What does that mean? Yes, you can exceed the word count, or you can provide less than the word count provided. There is no specific requirement as for how many words are you allowed to exceed. It's okay. Just think about this as a recommendation. It's not a requirement, it's a recommendation. It's just a guide for you. But if you exceed or if you provide less words, it's okay. It's not an issue that will make you fail or pass. Okay. Next, so I hope we are clear on the word count. This applies for all sections of the risk assessment. Whenever you see that word count, think about it as a guide. it's a recommendation, it's not a requirement, which means you can exceed, you can provide less words than required, it's okay. Next question that we had with regards to part 1 is, okay, still about word count. So in part 1, is the 150 to 200 words for the name of organization up to any other relevant information or only for the general description of the organization? What does that mean? I think the question meant, you see this 150 to 200 words, is it for the entire section? So that means from name of the organization to any other relevant information, or is it only for this general description of the organization? Well, the 150 to 200 words apply to this entire section. That includes name, site location, number of workers, general description, and so on. So the total should be 150 to 200 words. But again, it's just a recommendation. It's not a requirement. So you can exceed or you can provide less than that. Okay, what else? So part 2, so these are just the questions that we receive for part 1, not so much, but in part 2, there are more questions. What is part 2? This is where you do the risk assessment. So this is the risk assessment table. You have to provide hazard category and hazard, both. If you miss something, by the way, then that could be a reason for you to fail. If you miss, for example, you only mentioned the hazard, you didn't mention the hazard category, or the other way around, you could that will be a fail because the criteria says that risk assessment table must be properly completed, all sections. So if you miss anything, then the criteria is not met, then you will fail. So second column is who might be harmed, how, what are you already doing, or the existing controls, what further controls or actions are required. These are the additional controls. Then you need to provide also time scale for further actions. So for each actions, additional actions as you provided, you must provide specific time scale. And then finally, responsible person for each action. So reminder, we said 5 hazard category, total number of hazard is 10. So what are the questions? So, okay, so first question, is it okay to give at least 4 hazard categories? What do you think? Type the answer in the chat box. Is it okay? Say yes or no. So I wanna see the answer. What do you think? What's the answer to that question? Is it okay to give at least 4 hazard categories? Yes or no? Type your answer in the chat box. Let's see. I cannot see the chat box for some reason. Where is it? Okay, yeah, I'll check later, but let's just continue with the presentation. For those of you who answer yes, the answer is no, it's not okay to give at least 4 hazard category. The minimum number of hazard category is 5. If you do this, that's a fail. Why? Because criteria was not properly met. So again, minimum of 5 hazard categories. What do we mean by 5 hazard categories? What do we mean by categories? We had that covered in previous webinar. Those webinars are available in Trainovate YouTube channel. Just have a look and review again if you are confused still about the categories. Next question. Okay, the minimum is 10 hazards, right? Yes, that's correct. Then what is the maximum? Is it okay if I have 13 hazards taken from 7 different hazard categories? Okay, that's a very good question. So the minimum is 10 hazards, that's correct. And those 10 hazards should be taken from at least 5 different hazard categories. So what is the maximum? Is there any maximum? The guidance doesn't say anything specifically when it comes to the maximum. But if you provide 13 hazards, they are taken from 7 different categories, then yeah, that's okay because you have more than 10, which is the minimum when it comes to number of hazards, and you also have more than 5, which is the minimum when it comes to the hazard category. So 13 hazards taken from 7 hazard category is correct. But the question is, what is the maximum? How many hazards? When it comes to the maximum, if there's a minimum, what about the maximum? It's not clearly mentioned, but this is what the guidance says. It says that your risk assessment should not be about creating huge amounts of paperwork. What does that mean? Well, it means that you can exceed, but don't provide like 20. That would be too much paperwork. So 10, 13, I would say 13 is fine. 14, 15 is fine, but more than that, that's a little bit too much. So, and besides, you have other things. If you provide too much hazard, then it means you have to provide more controls. There's more work to do on your side. Then a problem is maybe you won't have time to focus on the other section of the risk assessment, like the part 3, for example, which is also a very large section. So provide more, but don't overdo it. There is no clear specification when it comes to the maximum number. It just says not too much amount of paperwork. So I would advise, just my opinion, don't go more than 15. Yeah, 14, 15 maximum. That should be your maximum. But even 12, 13, these are okay. So don't overdo it. Focus on other parts of the risk assessment as well. Okay, next. Okay, so in the first column in part 2, so we are now in the risk assessment table, hazard category and hazard. The hazard category is excavation. Then the hazard is just manual and mechanical excavation. Is that enough, or should I elaborate more? Well, my question would be manual excavation, mechanical excavation. That's kind of very general or very broad. So provide more information. So for example, you could add manual excavation using what, or mechanical excavation using what. Provide elaboration, because it's very, very general. When you say manual excavation, mechanical excavation, that's very broad. Elaborate more. For example, make manual excavation using something, provide more details. Okay, so let me stop there for a while and look at our chat box if there are any questions related to this topic. Okay, so there's a question. Is it required to make 2 hazards per one category? No, it's not required to have 2 hazards per category. As long as you have a total of 10 hazards, and as long as you have a total minimum 5 hazard category, you don't have to make it 2 per category. For example, I could have fire, that's one category. Maybe I have 3 hazards under fire. Chemical, that's the second category. I only have 1 about chemicals, and then I don't know what else. Ergonomics, maybe I have 4 about ergonomics. So it doesn't have to be 2, 2, 2, as long as you have a total number of 10 hazards and 5 categories at least. Okay, is it required to make 2 hazards per one category? I think we covered that. Yeah, we covered that question already. I think. Okay, one question about submission. Will it be fine if the date of my risk assessment is April 10 or 11? Okay, so good question about the date of risk assessment. Yeah, 10 or 11, that's fine. There is no specific again when it comes to the date of the risk assessment. But yeah, to make sense, make it before the submission. So it's up April 12 is your submission. Do not put like date of risk assessment April 13 or April 13. 10 or 11 would be okay. Okay, do we need to fill up all those columns for risk assessment? The answer is, what do you think? Do we need to fill up all these columns? What do you think? The answer is yes, you have to fill up all the columns. So let me go back to that section. Correct, the answer is yes. Okay, so let's go back to this one. Do we need to fill it up? Yes, you have to fill up all these sections. And even if you think that, for example, what are you already doing? You think that there are no existing controls, so you don't know what to put. Don't leave it blank. We say that in previous webinar. Just put something like NA, non-applicable, or no existing control. Don't just leave it blank. Say something. Other than that, yes, you must complete all these sections. Okay, so next we'll look at the chat box later, but let's continue with our presentation first. Where are we? Yes, so here. Okay, next question. For one hazard, how many control measures should I give to get good mark? This is a very, very good question. So if you have one hazard, how many controls do we need so that you get good marks? Now, there is no specific number when it comes to number of control measures. It's not about that. It's more about the controls that you provided. Is it enough to reduce the risk? That's the point. So here, the number of controls will be depending on what is the hazard first. And also, when we mark the paper, we look at it as a whole, and we look at the hazard, and we look at your control, including existing and additional, and we look at it and we say, is it enough to reduce the risk or not? So it's not about the number, it's more about the effectiveness. It's about if it can reduce the risk or not. Okay, so please mute your mic if you, we'll give you opportunity to ask questions later. So for now, kindly mute your mic. Okay, so like I said, there is no specific number of controls. It depends on the hazard. And the way we mark the paper, we look at the control existing and additional and look at it as a whole and we say, is it enough or not to reduce the risk? So number of controls would be depending on many factors. There is no clear specific number like, is it 1, is it 2? It depends. So make sure your control is enough to reduce the risk. That's the important part. Okay, next question. According to the hierarchy of control, it is suggested to reduce the risk by elimination engineering, then finally PPEs. That's correct. Using the hierarchy of control, it tells us that we always need to start with the most effective controls and leaving PPE as the last resort. But the question is, do all hierarchy of controls have an equivalent mark as long as the control measures are effective? Or is it recommended to use elimination administrative instead of PPEs to obtain good marks? Another very good question again. So the question here is about the controls. Do we need to always use the elimination administrative control, or can we just use PPE? It's connected to the previous question. Again, recommendation, yes, not just for the risk assessment, but in real life, when we select control measures, we always need to prioritize the upper part of the hierarchy of controls because they are more effective compared to PPE, for example. So in your control measure, you always try to consider other control and not always just focus on PPE if possible. So again, we are not giving you, it's not marked one by one. Like if you mention elimination, that's 1 point. If you mention PPE, there is no point. It's not laughing like that. And as you know, in risk assessment, there is no score. It's either pass or fail or refer. The way they say it is refer. So to pass, you have to meet all the criteria. One of the criteria that we look at is the risk assessment table completed properly? Are the controls enough to reduce the risk? So we look at your control. So for example, someone who is always talking about PPE for the 10 hazards, and it's all about PPE, 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 it tells us that this person maybe has a limited knowledge of hierarchy of control. Yes, we understand in some cases, maybe PPE is the only possible solution, but it cannot be PPE for all the entire 10 hazards. So if that's the case, there's something wrong because you are only focusing on PPE instead of thinking about other part of the hierarchy of control. So if that's the case, the criteria is not met because the risk assessment table is not properly completed because the controls are only PPE. So that would be a reason for someone to fail. So what I suggest is follow the hierarchy of control, yes, as much as possible. Prioritize the upper part of the hierarchy, not just the PPE. I'm not saying don't use PPE, but also think about other things aside from PPE. So mix it up, okay? So why are we doing that again? Because we want to make sure that the controls are enough to reduce the risk. And if you only use PPE, 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 it's also like you don't know anything aside from PPE. But like I said, we understand that there are some cases where PPE is the only thing possible, but it cannot be for all the entire risk assessment. So use the hierarchy of control and combine different type of controls. Okay, next. Okay, in 6th column, this is responsible person job title. Is it okay to use, right? Is it okay to use safety officer? Sorry for the wording. Yes, the answer is yes. Maybe you have one action and you want to assign it to the safety officer. Yeah, that's okay. As a responsible person, safety officer, yes. Okay, next, so we go to part 3. This is where you select 3 actions from your list of additional control, from your risk assessment table. You look at your additional controls and you need to select 3 actions. The actions that you think are the highest, the most urgent or the highest priority. And for each action, you need to justify your selection. Why did you select that action? To justify it, you have to use arguments, moral, legal, and financial. So we can see it in the table, just fill up the table. So you have the moral, general, legal, and financial argument. And then this is like something general for the 3 actions, you can combine that. And then one by one, for each action, you have to state what is the action, specify legal arguments for that, consider the likelihood and severity, and then finally, you have to elaborate how effective that action is likely to be in controlling the risk. For that, as you can see, there is a clear guide here. So you need to just follow whatever is written, provide information that is required. So for how effective is the action likely to be, you have to mention the intended impact of the action, justification for the timescale that you indicated in your risk assessment, and whether you think the action will fully control the risk. And this, you have to do this for the 3 actions that you selected. So once again, what is the action? Mention specific legal argument. And for the legal argument, we say that it must be ILO. And then likelihood and severity and how effective the action will be. So the moral, so going back to the previous one, the moral and the financial argument, you can put that more general because it's going to be more or less the same for each action. On moral, you say it's a responsibility of a company to protect the workers. Moral is more or less the same for the 3 actions. This is why we combine it more general. Same thing for the financial. You'll be talking about cause of accidents, for example, it's the same. This is why we combine the moral, the legal generally, and the financial. Now for each action, there should be something more specific when it comes to the legal argument. Because of the general part, maybe you'll be talking about like consequences of not complying with legal requirement. We can pay fines and there could be penalties. That's general for the 3 actions. But on the specific, we wanna know what is the specific ILO recommendation, convention, or codes of practices that was violated, or a duty that the worker is, the employer is supposed to do based on that action. Okay, so the question was, in choosing the action, will it be based on the real life scenario, which action should be done first, or will it be a self-preference, which action will be easy to justify using ILO convention, recommendations, and code of practice? This question is nice. It's a very smart question. Basically, the person is saying, which one is better? Should I select the action looking at the highest priority, or should I like look at the ILO convention, recommendation, and codes of practice first, and then based on that, I will select an action that is more related to an ILO convention. You see, it's like the opposite. So in order, the person here is saying, what if I look at action that will be easy to justify, because maybe I already have like some ILO convention, I have it in the manual, for example. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to select an action where I can use this ILO convention that I already have with me. So it's like the opposite. So if you have the legal argument already, what you want to do is just select the action that will be like connected to that legal argument. Well, yeah, that's very smart, but there's a problem with that because it really has to be the highest priority, because you'll have to justify your selection. And if you just justify an easy action, what are you going to say in the likelihood and the severity, how the action will be effective in reducing the risk? So no, we really have no choice. You have to go with the highest priority. So when you select your action, select the ones that are most urgent actions, the highest priority. And then once you find the 3 highest priority, that's the time you will look for the legal argument. It's not the other way around. Like I will look for the legal argument first, and if I can find one, I will look for an action that will be appropriate to that legal argument. It's going to be very difficult. So just go with the highest priority. Okay. Okay, can I get a specific legal from ILO code of practice aside from ILO recommendation? Yes, that is correct. If you look at the guidance, it says that your legal arguments must be based on the International Labor Organization convention, recommendations, and codes of practice. So it doesn't have to be convention. It could be a recommendation. It could be a code of practice as long as it's ILO. So it's clear it's ILO. This is on the specific legal argument for each action. And you can use your local law. If you're in the Philippines, for example, you want to mention the Republic Act 11058, but no, that is not enough. You can mention that, but there is no mark or it will not be considered. However, you will fail if you do not use the appropriate ILO legal requirement that is required as mentioned in the guidance. Okay, so convention, recommendation, or codes of practice. Okay, part 4, this is where you review, communicate, and check. Very short section. You have to provide when is the review date. And you need to explain why did you select that date. Next, you have to mention how will you communicate the risk assessment and who needs to whom are you going to communicate and how. And finally, the follow-up. How will you follow up on the actions that are mentioned in the risk assessment? Okay, so we didn't have any specific question for this one. So I just included, someone just submitted a question. So this is a late submission, so I was not able to incorporate it into the presentation, but I just put it here. Is there any name format for the risk assessment document file? For Trainovate students, you submit to e-learning at trainovate.com.ph, PDF, and name, just include your name and student number. So your full name plus student number. Okay. Next, do I need to put the term hazard category and hazard in column 1? You do not need to write it each time. It's already on the column title, so you do not need to write that. Just mention what is the hazard category and what is the hazard, without necessarily writing every time hazard category, fire, hazard, no need, as long as it's there, hazard category and hazard. But if you want to do it, that's fine too. It's just not required, okay? So in part 3, prioritization, is it accepted that the proposed control measures cannot totally eliminate the hazard because of other factor? Yes, yes. Totally eliminate, yeah, it's acceptable that you provide an action that will not totally eliminate, but it will reduce the risk to some point. That's what we are looking for. Maybe it will not totally eliminate, but what we want is how effective will it be in reducing the risk, not in totally eliminating the hazard. So the answer is yes. Okay, in time scale of the action, should I consider the location of our site that affects the purchasing duration of material as well as availability of contractor? Yes, yeah, time scale must be realistic. That's correct. So yes, there are cases where if you are in a remote area, purchasing will take much time. If any doubt, if you think that that the assessor will not understand why you put 6 months for a purchase of an equipment, for example, you can always put additional information between brackets. So say 6 months because of the availability of the part or because of purchasing problem or something. You can always put additional information between brackets. So yes, availability of contractor, yeah. So again, in case of doubt, put additional information. Okay, so that's it for my presentation, the questions that we received in advance. For now, let's look at the questions that you submitted through the chat box. So let me have a look. Okay, last one that I answered. Do we need to fill up all those columns for risk assessment? The answer was yes, unless you do not have any answer. And that is only applicable for the controls. Existing control, not applicable if there is none. Additional control, it's also possible to have not applicable or no additional control required if you think that the existing controls are already complete. That's it. Other than that, you cannot put not applicable in the hazard or who might be harmed and how. No, it must be completed. Okay, and also, in addition to that, of course, if you do not have any additional action because you think what is existing is already enough to register risk, so on the further action required, not applicable. Next, time scale, not applicable. Responsible person, not applicable because there is no additional control. But we said you cannot do that for 10 hazards. Think about other hazards that do not have or you need to put additional controls. Okay. Because how will the examiner rate you or how will they assess that you really know how to identify proper time scale and additional responsible person if everything is not applicable? Okay, next, is it okay if the company I will use is the one that I was employed 2 years back? Yeah, yes. What if those columns of the risk assessment are applicable or not relevant? What should we put? So put not applicable and A or none or no further controls required or no existing controls, something like that. But do not leave it blank. Do not leave it blank. That's a reason to fail if you leave anything blank when it comes to that control. Okay, next. Can I use Saudi Aramco standard as sources of information? Yes, the answer is yes. And that you will include that in part 1, sources of information. These are like the documents that help you to identify the controls or to identify the hazard. So yes, you can do that. In column 6, is it okay if I will put 2 to 3 responsible persons? Yes, it's possible if you want to, for example, purchase something, maybe that would be under the responsibility of the finance manager, and also with another manager, or maybe the safety officer will be working with the finance manager, something like that. So yes, it's possible to have 2 persons under one action. Make sure again, if you have like 3 actions, make sure that each action have a responsible person. Don't be lazy and put everything under one person. Try to separate. If you have like 4 bullets under action, mention also 4 bullets in the responsible person. Okay, what will be the date on when we conduct a risk assessment? There is no clear specific date, like time frame that we should consider when it comes to the date. Just mention a date before your submission is April 12. So I think anything before that would be okay. But do not put like year 2020. No, make it realistic. Something near the submission. So it could be like March or it could be April. Put a date like March or April. Select any date on March or April. But not after April 12. April 12 is the submission. Okay, next. Okay, you mean the file names for IG1 and IG2 will be the same, full name plus student number. It's slightly different for IG1. I think NEBOSH also requires you to put the learning partner name. I'm not sure about that, but check in the question or the answer sheet. During the exam, you'll have specific instruction on the question paper or on the answer sheet paper, so just follow that when it comes to the name. I cannot really remember. Yes, it has student number, name. I'm not sure if we also include the the training provider name. So that's a difference. In IG2, just put the name and student number. For IG1 again, read carefully the instruction that will be included on the answer sheet. Likelihood can be based on incident in story. Yes, yes, yeah, so that's correct. So likelihood, history, or how many times do you do, is it an activity that you do every day? If that's the case, then there is a high likelihood of something to happen because you are doing the activity every day, or if workers are more exposed, so yes, it could be also based on previous incident history. Okay, what else? That's it? Any other question? You could also mute your mic if you'd like to just, instead of typing, you could just state your question. So anyone, anything else? Clear, okay, so it's clear. So this is your last chance to ask questions because submission is 12. I don't think we will have another webinar before a submission. This is our last one. So question, please, if you have questions. None, going once, going twice.
Ma'am Alice, I have question.
Yes, Carlos, go ahead.
Regarding this, in the portion of how the risk assessment finding will be communicated. Actually, I proposed here, for example, we have different committees. We have different committees that will decide for a proposed action for our risk assessment here in the company. So it's okay to include all those committees, from top committees until the supervisor level committees.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Even we can also just say the health and safety committee members and then state some of them. If there are so many, you don't need to list down everything. Just put in couple of examples would be okay. So health and safety committee members such as the supervisor, so on and so on. So that's okay. Okay, who else? Can we call food delivery for all of us? Go ahead, Jory. Food delivery. Which one? What food? Okay, what else? Questions? Any question?
Hi, Miss Alice.
Yes, Domingo.
My risk assessment is resubmission. So the date was October 2020. I don't need to change the date.
Yeah, I think better to change the date still. Change the date.
Do I need to change the date?
Yes.
They will not match the old one into the new one?
If we match the old one into the new one, we look at the name and the student number, not the date. So change the date.
So they are not going to compare the old and the new?
If we are going to compare the old and the new, they will look at the student number because you are part of April batch for the exam.
Yeah.
So they will look at the number, student number, not the date. So I do not think it will make a very big difference if you keep the date for October and April now. But to make it more realistic, I would change the date.
Change the date. Yeah. So because what I did is I just rectified the comment from the past.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
and then so I am going to change also the dates. Let's say 2021. The date of assessment is 2021. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a question about specific legal requirement, legal argument. Is it necessary to put the complete details of provision in ILO convention recommendation, such as article numbers, part, then followed by the provision in the convention or recommendation? Well, if you look at the guide says that you do not have to put the entire paragraph. Yes, mention the name, article ILO convention C155, for example, and then mention the duty. What was the employer supposed to do? So no need to put the entire section. So convention, yes, article number, I would say yes. So ILO convention C155 article 10, which requires employers to do something. What is that? Something like that. Okay, John, I hope that answers the question. What else? Who else has got questions? None? Going once? Okay, so that's it for today. If you do not have further questions, okay, we have one more question. What will be the date on when we conduct risk assessment? So there is no specific requirement for the date. But like I said, I think to be more realistic, put a date that is somewhere near the submission. So don't put the date last year, for example. Put the date April, or you can even put March. I think that would still be okay. But so far, we do not have any requirement when it comes to the date. So Mark, I hope that answers the question. Okay, who else? Then if you have question, you can always send an email. When will this be available on our YouTube channel? I'm not sure. We will try to upload as soon as. I cannot say for sure if it's going to be when, but we will do it as soon as possible, because you understand there are also other students who are not able to join, but they would like to attend or watch as well. So we'll do that as soon as. I cannot say when. Okay, anyone else? None? Okay, so as I said, just send me an email if you have questions. Do not send me your risk assessment. That's a malpractice. We are not allowed to comment. You can always ask questions, but do not send your risk assessment to your instructor. We are not allowed to pre-check, pre-mark. That's overcoaching. It's not allowed. And we wish you all the best. My advice is always just follow the instructions. Everything that is required on that form, complete that clearly, and then provide everything that is needed, and you should be okay. It's okay to write more than writing less also. To whom do we send the risk assessment? Send it to e-learning@trainovate.com.ph. I'm sure you've received some email already from that one. Jovi is the one handling that. Once you submit, give her some time to respond to you one by one. She will send you an email to acknowledge receipt of your risk assessment, and that's it. So just give her some time to reply to all of you, because she's receiving all the risk assessment. So she could be replied maybe next day or something. Do not panic if you don't receive the reply right away. Okay, that's about it. If you do not have further questions, so we wish you all the best. And okay, there's always an additional question. When I'm about to end, there's another question. Okay, that was not a question, that's from Maricel. Okay. So look, have a look at the chat box, please. You have additional information on the submission. So deadline is April 12, midnight. PDF file. learner name and learner number on the risk assessment itself. So there's a section where you need to write your name and write your number, student number or learner number. And also on the name of the file, just write name plus student number. Okay.
Ma'am Alice.
Yes. Jory.
I have one question, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, it is okay if mostly of my time scale is only good for 1 day?
Depends on the action. Depends on the action. You have to think about, can this action be done in 1 day? If it's not, for example, if you tell me one of the action is training, I would think about, is it really possible to complete the training in 1 day? Maybe it will take more than 1 day. So yeah, it cannot be all 1 day change. Maybe not, it's not all realistic. So make sure change some of the time scale. It cannot be all 1 day. If you have training or if you want to install something or if you want to, I don't know your actions, but the point is time scale should be realistic. And just thinking about training, I do not think it's realistic to put 1 day for training because we need to schedule it, for example. So no, don't put all actions 1 day. Revise your risk assessment.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, that was the last question. So how about immediately in the time scale? Yes, is it okay? Yeah, it can be. Some actions can be done immediately, but again, cannot be all immediately. So we want to avoid any form of extremes, like everything immediately, everything 1 day. We want to avoid that because it makes you look like you're lazy. So it's just a copy paste immediately. So make sure it's realistic. So yes, some action could be immediately, but not all of them. Okay, last question. None, no more questions, no further questions. So good luck. We'll see you when we see you. We do not have any other webinar for before the exam, but again, if you have questions, just contact me through the e-learning platform or send an email or Facebook, whatever will be easier for you. You can always ask questions and we try to help you as much as we can. Okay. So wish you all the best. Thank you so much for attending our webinar today and good luck. You can do it.
Thank you.
Okay, Maricel. So that's it.
Thank you, ma'am. Good luck po sa inyong
Bye,
lahat.
everyone. Good luck.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye po.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you po.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am, Narina.